You know that sound, right? That horrible, sickening sound of something expensive hitting something immovable, metal twisting, glass shattering, wood splintering, but this time, the wood was the winner. I was standing on my porch, holding a lukewarm mug of coffee, my morning ritual. The newspaper still folded on the table, when the noise hit. It wasn't just loud, it was like the whole street took a lightning strike. I rushed out just in time to see the cloud of white airbag powder settling, hanging in the air like a ghostly surrender. And there she was, Diana Thorne, our self-crowned queen of the Crestwood Estates HOA, scrambling out of what used to be the front end of her pristine, jet-black Bentley Bentayga. She was staring, mouth agape, her signature oversized sunglasses lying shattered near the wheel well, staring not at the ruin of her $250 SUV, but at my fence. And for the first time in 18 months of this waking nightmare, the fence was still standing, solid, unyielding. Her bumper, the expensive, custom-painted black bumper, was curled up under the front axle like a crushed soda can, smoke hissing from a busted radiator. And her perfect, tailored linen suit was dusted white with powder. The best part? My neighbors. They weren't whispering this time. They were out on their lawns, leaning over their perfectly manicured hedges. And they were laughing, not a quiet, nervous chuckle, but full-bellied, audible, beautiful laughter. Because for nearly 2 years, Diana thought my property was her personal shortcut, a convenient dirt path she could plow through whenever she felt like saving 12 seconds on her drive to her Pilates class. She dared me to stop her. She mocked me for trying. And right there, on a sunny Tuesday morning, she hit the wall, literally. And trust me, it wasn't luck. I know. You probably think I'm just some petty homeowner who let a little turf war get out of hand. But you have to understand the context. The slow, agonizing erosion of dignity that Diana Thorne inflicted on this quiet little slice of the American dream. When I first bought this house, 127 Willow Creek Lane, it felt like winning the lottery without the tax debt. It was everything you picture: quiet streets, ancient oak trees, kids setting up lemonade stands, neighbors who mostly kept to themselves but waved when you passed. My house wasn't the biggest, but I poured everything into making it mine. I'm a hands-on guy. A retired structural engineer, actually, which is important later on. And the first big project I tackled? My fence. It wasn't a fancy wrought iron gate. Nothing so ostentatious. It was a simple, classic, 6-foot white cedar picket fence. But I built it myself. Every post, every rail, every picket, measured, plumbed, sunk deep, and painted a crisp, almost impossibly bright white. It took me 3 solid weekends, fueled by cheap coffee and the sound of my old golden retriever, Max, supervising from the shade. That fence wasn't just a boundary, it was a line in the sand. It framed my yard perfectly and gave me that deep, satisfying feeling of ownership. This is mine. This is sanctuary. And for a while, it was peaceful, until Diana Thorne decided I didn't deserve peace. In every subdivision, there's always a Karen, but Diana was high-end. She was the platinum-plated, diamond-encrusted model, early 50s, always dressed like she was about to be photographed for a yachting magazine, driving cars that cost more than most people's mortgages. And she wasn't just on the HOA board, she was the gravity that pulled the board around her. Unchallenged, untouchable, a perpetual sneer that suggested the rest of us were just messy peasants cluttering up her vista. At first, it was the small, passive-aggressive stuff. She'd slow her Bentley to a crawl as she drove past, roll down the tinted window just enough to let her voice drift out, perfectly modulated, like a knife scraping silk. "Ethan, darling, is that white a little too sterile?" The approved palette suggests a subtler eggshell. Or she'd corner me at the community mailbox cluster, inspecting my fence with a delicate fingertip. "The spacing. Ethan, did you measure the spacing correctly? We do frown upon geometric asymmetry in Crestwood." I'm a patient man. I'd smile, nod, murmur something polite about measuring twice and cutting once, and walk away. She's bored, I told myself. She needs a hobby. It'll pass. But people like Diana don't need hobbies, they need targets. The first time it happened, I woke up to Max barking like a maniac. Not his usual excited yelp, but a deep, guttural sound of alarm. I rushed outside, The fence, my beautiful, perfect fence, was listing. A whole 10-foot section splintered right through the middle, lying halfway across my lawn. At first, I thought it was an out-of-season microburst, a freak gust of wind. Then I saw them. Deep, brutal tire tracks cutting across the newly laid sod, leading straight through the wreckage. The tracks were wide. They were heavy. They belonged to an SUV. A large one. I didn't have to guess. A few hours later, I saw her, Diana, leaving her house for her afternoon trip to the very exclusive organic grocer downtown. And instead of following the curve of Willow Creek Lane like a civilized person, she turned her massive black Bentley, aimed it at my newly broken yard, and simply drove right through the gap, bouncing over the grass like a toy, never slowing down, never acknowledging the destruction she had wrought. She gave me the wave. You know the one, that little, insincere, two-finger lift from the steering wheel wave that screams, "Yes, I did this. What are you going to do about it, little man?" My jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth might crack. A decent person, a normal neighbor, would have left a note, offered to pay, or at least looked apologetic. Diana doubled down. I spent the next Saturday repairing the fence, hauling new cedar boards, hammering, sweating, trying to restore the line she had erased. But it was no longer about the wood, it was about the principle. I filed a formal complaint with the HOA, attaching photos of the tire tracks, the smashed wood, and even a slightly grainy video I managed to take the second time she used my property as a cut-through. The HOA meeting was a farce. Richard Harrison, the board president, a man whose spine seemed to have been surgically replaced with a wet noodle, shuffled my documents while Diana sat across the table, arms crossed, wearing a smirk that could curdle milk. "We appreciate you bringing this to our attention, Ethan," Harrison droned, clearing his throat. "However, property line disputes are, well, they are often a gray area." A gray area? It was my fence, on my deeded land, annihilated by one of their own board members. What part of that was remotely gray? Diana leaned forward, her voice dripping with mock concern, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Ethan, darling, maybe the issue isn't me. Maybe the issue is your fence. It's just not very structurally sound. Is it? Perhaps if you built something more in line with the community's robust standards, it wouldn't be so easy to accidentally damage." The board nodded along like a row of bobbleheads. By the end of the meeting, instead of Diana being fined for destruction of property, I walked out with an official notice. Violation. Fence in disrepair. Fine. $200. I nearly drove my own car through the HOA office window. Not only had she destroyed my property, but her corrupted system was now fining me for the privilege of being victimized. That was the moment the temperature in my blood dropped, and something cold and hard replaced the heat of simple anger. This wasn't just annoying anymore. This wasn't just a property dispute. This was a personal, humiliating, calculated war, and I had just been given a clear signal. The system was rigged. If I wanted justice, I had to create it myself. I didn't act immediately. That's what Diana expected. She wanted me to snap, to yell, to throw a rock, to do something stupid and loud that she could use to have me officially banished from the estates. But I'm a structural engineer. I believe in patience, precision, and finding the point of maximum leverage. The sweetest revenge, I realized, is quiet, patient, and absolutely devastating. I started watching her. Her routine was utterly predictable. The kind of rigid schedule only the truly entitled maintain. 7:30 a.m. Yoga. 10 a.m. The exclusive market trip. 4 p.m. Her HOA patrol, cruising the streets in her Bentley looking for lawn gnomes or unapproved paint swatches to report. And multiple times a week, I'd see that black monolith of a car cut across my corner, through the newly patched section of my fence, like it was a public right-of-way. It wasn't careless. It was a deliberate, arrogant power play, a taunt. If you want my fence to be your personal driveway, I thought, staring at the broken boards one night, Max whining softly beside me, then maybe it's time the driveway fought back. The humiliation kept building. Every time I repaired the fence, every time I bought more lumber and another can of impossibly bright white paint. It was like accepting her challenge. She saw it as an open invitation to test her car's bumper against my property. And she always won. I tried one last attempt at civility. I caught her unloading $800 worth of exotic vegetables one morning. "Diana," I said, keeping my voice level, maybe too level, a dangerous calm, "I need you to stop driving through my property. You're destroying my fence." She didn't even look up from her bag of heirloom potatoes. "Oh, please, Ethan," she sighed, adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet. "It's barely a fence. Honestly, it looks like a cheap set piece. If you wanted privacy, you should have built something sturdier. And besides," she finally looked at me, that sneer in full bloom, "you should be thanking me. I'm giving your yard character." Character. That word hung in the air, heavy and insulting. She was adding chaos, destruction, and a mountain of fines. But she called it character. I took my video evidence and my documented dates and times back to the board one last time, expecting justice, settling for a reprimand, but Diana just sat there, smug as ever, as Harrison, the president, told me that property lines were indeed a bit of a gray area. Diana, the master manipulator, even used it as leverage. Perhaps, Ethan, if you built something more in line with community standards, something more substantial, it wouldn't be so easy to accidentally damage. They nodded. They jotted notes about aesthetic violations. I walked out of that meeting, $200 poorer, with a new violation notice. And a deep, burning knowledge. I was on my own. She grew bolder. She didn't just drive through it, she made a spectacle. Once, I was having a barbecue, burgers, beer, friends over, and she barreled through, wood fragments flying, then waved at my guests like she was the star of the show. My friend stood there, slack-jawed, holding hot dogs, watching her roar away. It was pure, unadulterated public humiliation. "Might want to get that fixed, Ethan," she yelled back over the sound of her engine, her laughter echoing down the street like fingernails on a chalkboard. WA doesn't like eyesores. The costs were mounting. Lumber, paint, my weekend time, it all vanished, only to be replaced by another $200 fine. It was exhausting. It felt like I was locked in a Sisyphean comedy written by a sadist. But beneath the frustration, the engineer in me was quietly working, calculating, planning. Every time she smashed a picket, she was giving me another data point. Every sneer was another layer of motivation. She thought her power protected her. She thought her title shielded her. She thought her noise drowned out everyone else's voice. She was wrong. All it takes is one perfectly placed, calculated strike to bring the whole edifice crashing down. The moment that solidified my plan, the moment the war went from property damage to something sacred, happened on a Sunday afternoon. My sister, her husband, and my elderly father, Frank, were visiting. We were all sitting on the porch, sipping iced tea, the sun just starting to dip. It was perfect. And then, the familiar, arrogant snarl of the Bentley's engine. Before I could even stand up, she came barreling through. Boards exploded. Shards of cedar flew like shrapnel. The massive hood of the Bentley missed my porch railing by maybe 3 feet. My father, who has a pacemaker and is easily startled, dropped his glass. It shattered on the floor, the tea splashing across his shoes. His face went instantly pale, his hands trembling. For one terrifying second, I thought the car was going to slam straight into him. Diana, of course, didn't stop. She slowed just long enough to let out a condescending little laugh. Then sped off, leaving a cloud of dust and the sound of my sister trying to calm a shaking, terrified old man. That was the line. That was the absolute, non-negotiable end. This wasn't about wood anymore. This wasn't about pride. This was about the physical safety of my family. I lay awake that night, not with rage, but with a cold, clear determination. Diana wanted me to scream, to lash out, to do something she could use against me. That was her game, but I was going to play a different game. I was going to use her own arrogance and the very system she thought protected her to build her downfall. Patience, precision, and the fine print. I buried myself in the WA bylaws, city ordinances, and property codes. The language was dry, dense, and full of tedious jargon. But I was hunting for a weapon. And when I found it, I had to stop myself from shouting for joy. The rules were crystal clear. Homeowners had full rights to reinforce and maintain their fences as long as the external appearance remained consistent with community standards. I could build the strongest, Meanest, most immovable object known to man. Clad it in cedar, paint it white, and it would be perfectly legal. To the HOA, it would be compliant. To Diana Thorne, it would be an invisible brick wall. The humiliation, the fines, the helplessness, it all dissolved. In its place came a sense of absolute control. I wasn't playing defense anymore. I wasn't just fixing the fence. I was going to weaponize it. The plan took shape over weeks, months even, because the setup had to be flawless. Diana had to feel so safe, so entitled, that she wouldn't even hesitate. Step 1. The foundation. I drove across state lines to a specialty supplier, avoiding local lumberyards that might talk. What I bought wasn't for a fence. It was for a small bridge abutment. 18 10-foot structural steel I-beams. Heavy. Immense. The kind of steel you use when you want something to stay where it is forever. And the concrete? I bought it in bulk. 50-pound bags of the fastest setting, industrial-grade mix I could find. Working was brutal. I couldn't hire a crew, too much chatter. Too much risk. This had to be a ghost operation. So, every night, after 11 p.m., long after the last lights in Crestwood Estates winked out, I went to work. I dug. My back screamed. My arms felt like lead. And blisters bloomed on blisters. But I kept digging. Each post hole was 4 feet deep. Maybe deeper. Wide enough to cradle the heavy steel. I dropped the I-beams into the earth. One by one, checked them with a massive level, and poured the concrete. I didn't just fill the hole, I compacted it. I reinforced it. I made sure those steel sentinels were absolutely, physically immovable. I used a little portable mixer, had to muffle the sound with blankets, and the smell of fresh cement hung heavy in the cool night air. Max, my loyal old dog, was my only witness, sitting on the porch like a furry, aging sentinel, occasionally letting out a low growl when a car passed, giving me the signal to freeze. It was exhausting, grueling, lonely work, but every swing of the shovel, every bag of cement, felt like pouring justice into the earth. I was building her downfall, one calculated, legal ton at a time. Step 2. The disguise. Once the concrete cured, and I gave it a full week, just to be sure, I began the cladding. I had spent hours sourcing the exact same grade of cedar boards as the original fence, and the exact same shade of white paint. I wrapped the steel I-beams in the wood, perfectly measured to match the spacing and height of the existing fence line. From the street, in the harsh glare of the midday sun, you couldn't tell the difference. It was flawless. Another simple, perfectly compliant white picket fence. Nothing to see here, but inside, I knew it was a fortress wall waiting for an audience. I even had to take a small risk to ensure the disguise was flawless. I approached Mr. Harrison, the HOA president, when Diana wasn't around. "Mr. Harrison," I said, pointing to the newly reinforced section, "just wanted to let you know I took Diana's advice. I've rebuilt that section to be more robust, in line with community standards. Do you think the white is acceptable? It's a fresh coat." He barely glanced at it. "Already late for a golf game. Looks fine. Ethan, looks perfect. Compliant." Compliant. The word was sweeter than victory. Step 3. The signature. The fence was ready, but I wanted a little flourish. A bit of poetic justice. I went to the nursery and didn't buy just any roses. I bought 2 of the most aggressive, thorn-ridden climbers I could find, vines with thorns that looked like medieval weaponry. I planted them near the steel-reinforced posts and trained them carefully through the pickets. They were beautiful, deep crimson blooms, exactly the kind of landscaping enhancement the HOA always gushed about in their newsletters. And the thorns? They were subtle, just poking out enough to grab anything that might dare brush past them at speed. Beauty and brutality, side by side. I stood back when I was finished. Covered in dirt, dried concrete dust, and paint smears, the new section of my fence glowed white in the dawn. Silently waiting. It was stronger than the day I built the house. It was stronger than Diana's car. But I wasn't done being prepared. I installed 2 tiny, discreet security cameras, one hidden deep in the rose bush, focused on the fence line, and one hidden in the eaves of my garage, capturing the entire approach from the street. If Diana tried her stunt again, she wouldn't just meet my fortress wall, she would be starring in her own full-length feature film. complete with sound and crystal clear resolution. No denials, no accidents, no twisting the truth. Cold, hard, undeniable evidence. I went about my days with a quiet, lethal calm. When Diana drove past, I waved back with a cheerful, slightly vacant smile. She didn't suspect a thing. Why would she? She thought I was beaten, fined into submission, a joke to the neighborhood. She didn't realize that beneath that innocent coat of white paint, I had buried a consequence that would chew her $500,000 vehicle alive. The anticipation was almost unbearable. A silent, electric hum under my skin. Every time I walked past that fence, I pictured the moment, the horrific crash, the hiss of the radiator, the look on Diana's face when she realized her shortcut had just betrayed her. Revenge wasn't just coming, it was inevitable. Her arrogance was the engine, and my fence was the unyielding brick wall. She had all the power, all the prestige, all the influence, but I had the fine print, the I-beams, and the patience. And I knew, absolutely knew, she couldn't stop herself. She was addicted to the transgression. She would strike again, and when she did, I would be ready. There's a specific kind of tension that grips you when you know something monumental is about to happen. But you don't know when. It's like the air gets thicker, heavier, the kind of stillness that precedes a thunderstorm. That's how I lived for the next 3 weeks after finishing the fence. Every morning, I woke up, half expecting to hear the sound of twisted metal. Every evening, I went to bed wondering if tonight would be the night she finally delivered the satisfaction I'd spent months constructing. And then, one sunny Saturday afternoon, it happened. I was outside, watering the aggressive, beautiful roses I'd planted, pretending to read a week-old copy of the Wall Street Journal. But really, I was just watching her driveway. Across the street, Diana's garage door rumbled open with a dramatic, almost theatrical groan. Out came the black Bentley Bentayga, polished to a mirror shine, gleaming like a predator that knew it was invincible. I swear, the car almost growled as it rolled onto the asphalt. Diana was behind the wheel, of course. Perfectly coiffed blonde hair, the inevitable oversized sunglasses, her mouth pursed in that characteristic scowl of entitlement. She didn't even glance my way. Why would she? I was just Ethan, the guy she had financially terrorized and publicly humiliated. I was beneath her notice. She pulled out, revved the engine once, a little unnecessary flourish, like a bull pawing the ground before a charge, and then, without the slightest pause, without the slightest flicker of self-doubt, she turned her wheel, aimed directly at the section of my fence she had smashed a dozen times before, and hit the gas. I'll never forget the sound. Never. It wasn't the familiar, pitiful snap of cedar boards yielding to 2 tons of German engineering. This was different. This was a sound of absolute, unyielding resistance. It was a deep, guttural kraang, a metallic bell tolling, followed immediately by the sickening, high-pitched shree of steel grinding against steel. The horrific noise of an expensive machine trying desperately to become one with an immovable object. The Bentley jolted violently, instantly stopped dead, the momentum slamming her forward against the seatbelt. The front bumper crumpled inward, folding up like cheap cardboard against the hidden I-beams. The headlights winking out forever. And then, the white THWOOMP of the airbags exploding, filling the cabin with a suffocating, dusty cloud of surrender. Diana's sunglasses, the ridiculously expensive ones, flew off her face and skittered across the pavement. Her scream, muffled by the airbag, was still high-pitched and hysterical, probably audible all the way down to the community pool. And the roses? The roses did their part beautifully. Their aggressive, wicked thorns raked across the glossy black paintwork, carving deep, jagged, unmistakable lines into the side panel as the car was forcibly halted. Branches snapped under the impact, scattering crimson petals like confetti at a twisted celebration of karma. For once, it wasn't my fence lying in ruins. It was her car. The neighbors. Oh, the neighbors. They came pouring out of their perfectly tidy homes like spectators rushing to the scene of a movie stunt. They didn't even bother to grab jackets, they just grabbed their phones. This wasn't just drama, this was a spectacle. The kind of neighborhood reckoning that ends up on local news blogs. I could already hear the social media captions. Joaquin meets her steel match. I put down my watering can, took a deep breath, and walked slowly toward the wreck. I wanted to savor every excruciating second of her humiliation. There she was, Diana Thorne, staggering out of the driver's seat, her hair disheveled, her expensive blouse now dusted white with the powdery residue of defeat. She had tiny, bright red scratches across her arms where the rose thorns had reached in to claim their price. Her face was flushed, contorted with a mixture of fury and absolute, crushing embarrassment. What the hell did you do?" she shrieked at me, pointing a trembling finger like she was casting some impotent, powerless spell. I fought the grin, letting only a slow, deliberate smile touch the corner of my mouth. I raised an eyebrow, genuinely perplexed. "Me? Diana, I think you finally underestimated offense." The laughter from the neighbors was instant and loud. Not the polite, nervous chuckles of the past. This was real, cleansing, cathartic belly laughter. For 2 years, Diana had strutted around untouchable. And now, here she was, standing in front of a mangled ruin, her kingdom crumbling beneath the power of a few strategically placed I-beams and a copy of the HOA bylaws. She stomped over to the wreck, kicking at the fence, expecting it to fall, expecting the compliant cedar boards to give way. As they always had, it didn't budge. The clang of her designer heel against the hidden steel only made her look more utterly ridiculous. "You set me up," she spat, glaring at me as if I'd committed some grand, unforgivable crime against her personal sovereignty. I shrugged, crossing my arms over my chest. "I reinforced my fence. Perfectly legal. Want to see the permits and the receipts? They're all certified compliant." That was the moment I saw it. The first, tiny, flickering spark of doubt in her eyes. For the very first time, Diana Thorne realized she was not in control of the narrative. The crowd grew thicker. Kids were pointing. Adults were whispering. Cameras were zoomed in on the destruction. Fluids were dripping steadily onto the pavement. A dark, oily pool spreading beneath the car. The Bentayga was literally bleeding out its engine oil. The roses swayed gently, their petals redder than ever, celebrating the victory of the common man over the petty tyrant. Diana, desperate to salvage her shredded dignity, tried to play the victim. She straightened her suit, lifted her chin, and turned to the crowd. "He's dangerous. He booby-trapped his property to hurt me." The laughter that followed was deafening. One of the old-timers, a neighbor named Mr. Jenkins, leaned over his low wall and called out, "Booby-trapped? Lady, you drove your truck straight into his yard. What were you expecting? A welcome mat?" I almost lost my composure. Diana's face was rapidly turning the color of her crushed rose petals. She pointed at me again, sputtering about lawsuits and HOA violations. But the damage was done. The queen had been dethroned, and the show was just getting started. I leaned casually against the fence, a victor resting on his spoils. "Well, Diana," I said, making sure my voice carried across the lawn, "guess the shortcut is permanently closed." She stormed back toward her wreck, muttering curses, but she was defeated. The fence had won. It didn't take long for the humiliation to curdle into pure, unadulterated fury. She had to call a special heavy-duty tow truck, which struggled for nearly an hour to winch the mangled Bentley away from my unyielding steel posts. The entire process was filmed, of course, and became instant viral gold. The Bentley Battle of Crestwood Estates was trending. The next week, the insurance adjuster showed up. A dry, humorless man named Mr. Thompson. He circled the wreck, which was now sitting forlornly in Diana's driveway. A monument to her hubris, clicking his tongue. Diana was right there, gesturing wildly toward my fence, which, I should mention, I had already repainted and tidied up to look even more pristine. "He did this. He built a trap. You have to mark it as vandalism so I can file the claim." Mr. Thompson, clipboard in hand, raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Vandalism, ma'am? With respect, it looks like you drove your vehicle into a properly maintained, stationary object. I'm noting severe front-end damage consistent with a high-impact collision against a fixed, reinforced structure." "He tricked me," she screeched, her voice shooting up an octave. "Ma'am," the adjuster sighed, rubbing his temples, "your policy doesn't cover intentional trespass leading to vehicular damage. And frankly, the preliminary reports, and what I've heard from the neighbors, Suggest this isn't the first time you've used this specific route. That was the key. Insurance adjusters talk to people. And people, especially in Crestwood Estates, had been waiting for a hero. They'd been waiting for a reason to talk. Mrs. Jenkins, Mr. Jenkins, Mr. Lopez from 2 doors down, they all materialized. Eager to give testimony, they recounted the countless times they'd seen Diana cut across my property, turning her private act of aggression into a documented community hazard. The preliminary findings came back swiftly: claim denied, citing negligence, repeated trespass, and possible misrepresentation of facts. The cost of repair, tens of thousands, was on her. Her empire of intimidation was crumbling faster than her bumper. At the next emergency HOA meeting, she made one last stand. She marched in, impeccably dressed, but the faint red scratches on her arms were still visible. A scarlet letter she couldn't hide. She slammed her binder onto the table. "This man is a menace," she declared, pointing an accusing finger right at me. "He deliberately sabotaged his fence. He's a danger to the community." I simply opened my folder, sliding across the table the official receipts, the relevant HOA bylaws highlighted in bright yellow, and a USB stick containing the crystal clear footage from my 2 security cameras. "Everything I did," I said calmly, "was legal and compliant, and here's the proof of exactly what happened." The murmurs in the room were deafening. Diana's allies shifted uncomfortably. They smelled blood in the water. She was no longer a queen, she was a liability. Mr. Harrison, the spine-free president, finally cleared his throat, his face pale. "Diana, based on the documented evidence, Ethan has acted within his rights. Furthermore, repeated trespassing, even with a vehicle, is itself a violation of Crestwood rules." "You're taking his side?" she spluttered. "After everything I've done for this community?" A man in the back piped up. "Yeah, like fining us for leaving holiday lights up too long?" Laughter rippled through the room. The tide had definitively turned. Diana, the woman who once silenced a room with a glare, was now being openly mocked by the very people she used to rule over. But the final, crushing blow came a week later, on a hot Thursday afternoon. I was outside, finishing up some trim work, enjoying the quiet, when the sound of her Bentley's engine, still sounding rough from the temporary patch-up job, rumbled down the street. She didn't stop in her driveway. She pulled right up to my yard, slammed the door, her face a mask of frantic, unhinged fury. "This is your fault," she screeched, pointing. "Diana," I said, setting down my tools, "you need some new material. You've been saying that for weeks." That was it. That was the last thread snapping. In one swift, terrible motion, she stomped across my grass, marched straight up to my mailbox, the heavy, government-issued one I'd had since I bought the house, and ripped it clean out of the ground. Concrete base and all. Time froze. She stood there, clutching the crumpled mailbox like a bizarre, dirt-caked trophy, her chest heaving, her eyes wild. Then, reality hit, both her and the neighborhood. Gasps erupted, curtains twitched. 3 neighbors immediately started shouting and filming. Mrs. Jenkins, the old lady from across the street, yelled, "That's a federal offense, you lunatic." Diana spun around, dropping the mailbox with a heavy, final thud. "He deserved it. He's been tormenting me. This is entrapment." "Diana," I said, stepping back slowly, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. "You just committed a federal crime in broad daylight. On camera. Congratulations." Before she could even respond, the street lit up, blue and red lights, 2 patrol cars, sirens cutting through the summer air. Someone had called 911 the second they saw the mailbox leave the ground. The officers stepped out. One of them, a tall woman with mirrored sunglasses, looked from Diana to the mangled mailbox lying in the dirt. "Ma'am," she said, her voice flat, "is there a reason you are holding a federal mailbox?" Diana froze. "Trapped. He set me up. This is a conspiracy." The officer didn't flinch. "Ma'am, destruction of federal property is a crime. You are under arrest." Cheers erupted from the neighbors. Someone whistled, and Diana, shrieking about her rights, about conspiracies, about having the office's badges, was cuffed. Within seconds, she was led to the squad car while the entire cul-de-sac filmed the spectacle. As they pushed her into the backseat, she locked eyes with me through the window. Her face was contorted with pure, helpless, impotent rage. She mouthed 3 words: "This isn't over." But we both knew it was. HOA bylaws bend, insurance companies hedge, but federal crimes? That's the endgame. A month later, after she was stripped of her board position, officially banned from holding future office, and facing staggering legal fees and fines, the for sale sign went up on her immaculate lawn. Big red letters: price reduced. I didn't throw a party, but I did open a very expensive bottle of single malt scotch. I rebuilt the fence one final time, sanding the boards smooth, painting them the brightest white I could find, and on the section where the Bentley met its doom, I hung a custom-made wooden plaque. Burned into the wood were 3 neat block letters: Diana's last stand. The neighbors loved it. It became a symbol, not just of my little victory, but of the community finally standing up to tyranny. Mr. Harrison, the spineless HOA president, actually stopped by, shook my hand, and muttered, "Good work, Ethan, you did what the rest of us couldn't." The truth is, Diana's downfall wasn't about fences or bylaws or even cars. It was about pure, unadulterated arrogance, about what happens when someone believes they are above the rules. Untouchable, until reality, in the form of 4 feet of concrete and structural I-beams, smacks them in the front bumper. I could have lost my temper months earlier. I could have yelled, cursed, maybe even gotten myself into real trouble. But instead, I waited, I studied the rules, I played the long game. And when the moment came, Diana walked straight into the trap she herself had built. That's the thing about people who think the rules don't apply to them. They create their own downfall. They get so blinded by their entitlement that they can't see the wall in front of them, even when it's painted bright, undeniable white. So, tell me in the comments below, have you ever dealt with a Diana in your life? Maybe it was a boss, a neighbor, or a colleague who thought they were untouchable. How did you handle it? Did you fight fire with fire? Or did you, like me, find the rulebook, sharpen your pencil, and let them trip over their own pride? Let's talk about justice, right and wrong, and the sweet satisfaction of karmic payback. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this story. And make sure you subscribe. Because trust me, Crestwood Estates still has plenty of stories left to tell.